There's always a moment when reality hits you square in the face, a moment when everything you've known, everything you've built, is about to fall apart. For me, that moment came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon when my husband, Ryan, sat across from me at the kitchen table, his expression unreadable. It wasn't sadness, nor was it anger. No, it was something much worse, a quiet, resolute determination. It was the kind of look someone gives you when they've made up their mind about something life-changing, and they're just waiting for you to catch up to that realization. I don't remember what I was doing before he called me into the kitchen. Maybe I was lost in a book, folding laundry, or scrolling mindlessly through my phone. It was just another ordinary day until it wasn't. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. Those 4 words have a power all their own, don't they? They're a prelude to something bad, something inevitable. As soon as he uttered them, a chill washed over me, and I knew exactly where this was headed. I sat down, trying to keep my face neutral, but my heart raced. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, though deep down I dreaded the answer. Ryan took a deep breath, and for a fleeting moment, I thought maybe he was having second thoughts about whatever bombshell he was about to drop. Perhaps, just maybe, he'd realized that this wasn't worth it, that we were worth more than whatever was about to spill from his lips. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a man who was too far gone for that kind of introspection. "I've met someone," he said, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. There it was, the truth I dreaded hearing. 3 words that should have shattered my world. In any other context, they would have left me gasping for breath, feeling as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. But oddly enough, in that moment, I felt nothing. Just a strange, empty calm enveloped me. I looked at him, waiting for more. "She makes me feel alive again," he continued, his eyes searching mine for some kind of reaction. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but I've been unhappy for a long time, and this just happened. I didn't mean for it to, it just happened." I raised an eyebrow. "So, what do you want to do about it?" Ryan blinked, clearly thrown off by my lack of emotion. I think we need to end this," he said, his voice steady but lacking any warmth. He said it with such finality, as if he had rehearsed it 1,000 times before finally letting it slip out. Maybe he had been planning this for weeks or months, waiting for the right moment to tell me. I could picture him running the words over and over in his mind, imagining how I would react, tears, yelling, begging him to stay. But here's the thing. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even particularly surprised. "All right," I said slowly, my voice surprisingly calm. Ryan stared at me as if I had just spoken another language. "All right? That's it? What do you want me to say?" I could see the confusion written all over his face. "You've clearly already made up your mind. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you to stay if you don't want to." He was silent for a moment, and I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to process my reaction. This wasn't the response he had expected. Hell, it wasn't even the reaction I thought I'd have. But when he said those words, "I've met someone," I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me, as if the weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had suddenly lifted off my shoulders. I didn't love Ryan anymore, not in the way I used to. Somewhere along the line, we had lost each other, and I hadn't even noticed until now. Our marriage had become routine, mechanical, something we did because it was expected, not because we genuinely wanted to. We weren't the same people we'd been when we first got married. Somewhere, somehow, we had both changed, and neither of us had the courage to admit it until this moment. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly flustered by my reaction. "I didn't expect you to take it like this." "How did you expect me to take it?" I asked, genuinely curious. I don't know, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I thought you'd be upset. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Why would I be upset? You're not happy, and you found someone else. What's the point in me getting angry about it? It won't change anything. He blinked at me, confusion still etched on his face. But we've been married for 12 years. Yeah, I said, nodding. We have, and it's been 12 long years. But I'm not going to beg you to stay if you don't want to. The truth was, I didn't want him to stay, not anymore. Hearing him say he wanted out made me realize that I wanted out too. Our marriage had become a shell of what it once was. We went through the motions, but the spark was long gone. Maybe it had been extinguished for years, and we were just too comfortable or too afraid to admit it until now. Ryan sat there, still trying to process my response. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out why I wasn't falling apart in front of him. I thought. He trailed off, looking down at his hands. I thought you'd care more. I do care, I said quietly. I care that you're happy, and I care that I'm happy too, but I'm not going to fight for something that's already over. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion and something else, frustration. You're just okay with this? Just like that? I shrugged, trying to maintain my composure. What's the alternative? You stay with me out of guilt? We drag this out for another few years pretending everything's fine when we both know it's not? That's not fair to either of us. I could tell he hadn't expected this. He hadn't anticipated my willingness to let him go without a fight. And for some reason, that seemed to anger him. So that's it? He said, his voice rising. You're just going to let me walk away? You're not even going to try to save this? I frowned, genuinely puzzled by his reaction. You just told me you found someone else, Ryan. You want to end our marriage. What do you expect me to do? I don't know, he snapped, standing up and pacing the length of the kitchen. I just thought you'd care more, that you'd fight for us. I'm not going to fight for something you've already thrown away, I said calmly. You've clearly made up your mind. What's the point in fighting? He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I haven't thrown anything away. I raised an eyebrow. You just told me you met someone else. How is that not throwing us away? Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stood there, breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger and frustration. In that moment, I realized what was really going on. This wasn't about me. It wasn't even about our marriage. This was about him. Ryan had expected to be the one in control, the one making the decision to leave. He wanted to feel like he was important, like he was the center of my world, even as he was telling me he wanted to leave it. But when I didn't give him that, when I didn't cry or scream or beg him to stay, he didn't know what to do. You're angry because I didn't fight for you, I said, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. His jaw tightened. No, I'm not. Yes, you are, I countered, standing up to face him. You wanted me to beg you to stay, to tell you that you're making a mistake, to make you feel important. And now that I'm not doing that, you're pissed off. Ryan stared at me, his chest rising and falling with each breath. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, but then he looked away, his shoulders slumping. I don't know what I expected, he muttered, the fight seeming to drain from him. I sighed, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what we'd lost, but relief that it was finally out in the open. I don't want to be with someone who doesn't want to be with me, I said softly. And I don't think you want to be with someone who's just holding on out of fear. Ryan didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at the floor, as the reality of our situation sank in. "I'm not going to fight for something that's already over," I repeated. "I think we both know it's been over for a long time." There was a long silence as we both stood there, the weight of 12 years hanging heavily between us. Finally, Ryan looked up, his eyes shining with something I hadn't expected: guilt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He shrugged, looking defeated. "I guess I thought I could find something that was missing. I didn't think it would end like this." "And now you know," I replied, my heart aching for the man I once loved. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Ryan sighed, breaking the silence. "So what now?" I shrugged again, feeling a mixture of fear and freedom. "We figure it out, I suppose. Maybe we can come to some kind of agreement. It doesn't have to be ugly." "Yeah," he said, nodding slowly. "I'd like that." In that moment, I realized something else. We didn't have to end on bad terms. Even though we were both hurting, we could still find a way to move forward without animosity. We had shared a life together, and despite everything, I still cared about him. I wanted the best for him, even if that meant letting him go. "We should probably talk to a lawyer," I said finally. "Figure out the logistics of this whole thing." He nodded, looking relieved. "Yeah, that makes sense." As the reality of our situation settled in, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I didn't know what the future held for either of us, but I was determined to make the best of it. I wouldn't let this define me or break me. We both deserved happiness, even if it meant going our separate ways. "Hey," I said softly, trying to lighten the mood. "At least now you can have your cake and eat it too, right?" Ryan chuckled, and the tension in the room eased just a little. "Yeah, I suppose so, but it doesn't feel as great as I thought it would." I smiled sadly, understanding all too well. Sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just a different shade of brown. As we talked, we began to sift through the memories we had created together, both the joyful ones and the painful ones. It felt like peeling back layers of an onion, revealing both the sweetness and the sting beneath. Each memory held its weight, but somehow, sharing them made it easier to bear. "I remember that time we went camping in the mountains," Ryan said, a small smile creeping onto his face. "We got lost for hours, and you were convinced we were going to starve." "Hey, I had every right to be worried," I said, laughing lightly. "You were too busy taking pictures of the scenery to realize we were heading in the wrong direction." "True, but it made for a great adventure," he replied, his eyes twinkling. It was moments like this that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place: the laughter, the shared experiences, the adventures. But just as quickly, the weight of reality settled back in. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and reminiscing, both of us knowing it would be the last time we'd share this kind of intimacy. And as evening crept in, the kitchen filled with an unsettling silence. "Thank you for being so understanding," Ryan said, breaking the silence once more. "I didn't expect this from you." "Neither did I admitted, feeling the lump in my throat grow larger. "But I think it's for the best. We both deserve to be happy, even if it means apart." "I'll always care about you," he said, sincerity etched into his features. "You've been a huge part of my life." "And you've been a huge part of mine," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. But sometimes, love isn't enough to keep people together. As we said our goodbyes, I felt a heaviness lift off my shoulders, replaced by a flicker of hope for the future. I watched as he walked out the door, knowing it was the last time I'd see him as my husband. It was the end of an era, a painful one, but also a necessary one. In the days that followed, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the life we had shared, but relief at the thought of starting anew. I threw myself into work and spent time with friends, slowly rebuilding my life brick by brick. I had moments of doubt, wondering if I had made the right decision. But every time the memory of Ryan's words echoed in my mind, I felt more certain. This was the right choice, not just for him, but for me too. As the weeks turned into months, I began to find joy in my own life again. I took up new hobbies, met new people, and slowly but surely, I started to remember who I was before our marriage. Ryan and I maintained a cordial relationship as we navigated the logistics of our divorce, but there was a bittersweet distance between us now. We were no longer the couple who shared dreams and plans. We were just two people trying to figure out how to untangle the life we had built together. One evening, I received a message from Ryan. He wanted to meet up to finalize some of the details regarding our split. I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as I agreed to meet him at a local cafe. When I arrived, he was already seated at a small table by the window. He looked different, more relaxed, maybe even happier. I took a seat across from him, our usual small talk hanging in the air like an old, familiar song. "How are you doing?" he asked, genuine concern lacing his voice. "I'm okay," I replied, mustering a smile. "Just trying to navigate this new chapter of my life." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been doing a lot of thinking too. About us, about everything." "What do you mean?" I asked, intrigued. "I've realized how much I took for granted," he said slowly, his eyes searching mine. "I miss some of the little things, the comfort we had. It's not easy to find that with someone new." A pang of nostalgia hit me, but I swallowed it down. "We shared a lot, Ryan, but we also grew apart. Sometimes, love just isn't enough to keep things together." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I know, and I'm sorry for how things turned out. I really am." "I appreciate that," I said softly. "But we both made choices, and now we have to live with them." The conversation lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken feelings. I could sense the remnants of our shared past weaving through the words we exchanged. But they felt different now, less like a plea for reconciliation and more like a farewell. As we finished our coffee, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure settle in my heart. It was time to let go, to truly move forward. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking of Ryan less and less. The memories faded into the background as I embraced new experiences and connections. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon a quote that resonated deeply with me. "Sometimes you have to let go of the life you plan to make way for the life that is waiting for you." In that moment, I realized I had finally begun to embrace my new life. It wasn't easy, but I was ready to step into whatever the future held. Eventually, I found a new job, one that ignited a passion I had long forgotten. I started attending workshops and connecting with people who inspired me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. Months passed, and life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. I discovered a sense of strength within myself that I hadn't known existed. I began to cultivate new relationships, rekindling friendships that had faded in the shadow of my marriage. Then, one sunny afternoon, I received a text from Ryan. He wanted to meet up for lunch, and while part of me felt apprehensive, another part was curious. I agreed, intrigued to see how he had been doing since our last encounter. When we met, I was surprised to find him looking genuinely happy. He shared stories of his new relationship, and while it stung to hear about his life moving on without me, I also felt a sense of relief. "I think we're both on the right path," he said, his eyes bright. "I really hope you find what you're looking for." "I'm getting there," I replied, smiling. "I think I finally understand what I want for myself." As we parted ways that day, I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of acceptance. This wasn't just the end, it was also a beginning. In the months that followed, I embraced my new life with open arms. I traveled, explored new passions, and immersed myself in experiences that made my heart sing. I learned to love myself, flaws and all, and in doing so, I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Every time I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, I reminded myself that this was part of healing. It was okay to miss the good times, but it was also essential to cherish the lessons learned. Eventually, I met someone new, a kind, thoughtful soul who encouraged me to embrace my true self. As our connection deepened, I realized that love didn't have to be complicated, it could be simple, joyful, and fulfilling. And one evening, as we sat under a starlit sky, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had finally learned to let go of the past and embrace the present. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but I was grateful for every step. I had learned to forgive not just Ryan, but myself too. I had discovered that love, in all its forms, was a beautiful gift that could take on many shapes. Looking back, I understood that life had a way of unfolding just as it was meant to. I didn't regret the love I had shared with Ryan. It had been a significant part of my journey. In the end, it was about growth, healing, and the possibility of new beginnings. I was ready to embrace the next chapter with an open heart and a spirit full of hope. Life is a series of transitions, and I had come to appreciate that every ending is merely a new beginning.